Wow, so we are live already, huh? This is the big beast. Hello to both of you guys. Let me step around behind the camera and shut the door quick and see if anybody else is going to show up. Right. Hey, Curtis. Well, the party's starting to get here. Duo? Nina? Let's get our pop-out chat going. So no real agenda. I just figured it's Saturday afternoon. I finally got Ozzy here out of mothballs. I haven't really had a chance to work on him since last spring. Well, Nina, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. As I was saying, Ozzy's kind of been on ice for a long time here. I just haven't had time to work on him with everything else going on. So I thought I'd pull him out and kind of see where I left off on the mods and upgrades and see what needs to be done to finish him off and get him back up and running again. So let's see if anyone else is coming or if this is about it. The little back history, Ozzy started life as a gMax 1.0, their Kickstarter era. So originally the side here was like an A-frame. Let me see how much room I have to rotate. Oop, I gotta hold it, I guess. This side was actually like an A-frame, so from the back it shot up at like a 30-degree angle, then had another brace that came down this way. And they had since modified it to go to the 1.0 to the 1.5, then the 1.5 XT. Well, the XT is the extra tall. 1.5S or whatever the latest variation of the gMax is. Where they've started adding heat beds and other stuff. We kind of had our own group that was actually doing a lot of those modifications before gMax or before gCreate was even doing them. So some of those hacks have already been put in here. Like, let me pull this back and let me do that. So I'll try to move this around to give you a look. So some of the mods that I've done here, if I can get the camera up in there to show you, is these are MDF, but I actually built leveling feet into the corners so that you can adjust the screw from the top in all four corners to be able to level the frame once you get it set on your table. Evening Dragon Monk. The gMax originally had used, and I believe they still do, they had V-slot rails similar to the X-axis here, which is what the bed rolled on. And there was a lot of side-to-side play and a lot of wobble. It wasn't really well supported. So I had upgraded that to these linear rails with the bearings underneath to be able to get it, it's obviously much louder, but it's also much smoother down there. Now, if you can see the edge of the bed here, if I can get that to show. Let's see if I can. There we go. So we had designed our own heat bed for these at one point. We'd looked at starting a company called Jank 3D, and life just kind of took over and it never really got off. But we were planning on producing upgrades for the older gMaxes, and one of the things that we designed before they had a heat bed was this guy, which is our full-size heat bed. Now, my actual carriage here is actually larger than a gMax because I needed room for playing and experimenting. So this is actually 420 by 420 with the glass on top, where the heat bed itself, if you can see, is the actual size of a gMax bed. But the way that we designed this is a dual zone heater here. So there's a central zone. Maybe I can write in the dust to show this. That's about the size of your average 8-inch by 8-inch or 210 by 210 printer. There's a central heat zone here. Then the perimeter out here, the outside donut, is actually its own heating zone on the bed. Each of those can be controlled and monitored independently. So if you're only doing a small print in the center of the bed, there's no reason to heat the whole thing. Just heat up the center, get it done and over with. If you're doing a large print, then you can fire it up as needed. And then going back what I was showing about the down here, the way let's see if I can get that to focus. So the way it layers up is we've got 6mm phenolic down here, which is lighter than aluminum, but just as rigid. 2 6mm layers of cork. Now this top one is kind of shaped like a donut, so it's all hollow in the middle underneath the heat bed. So if the heat bed bows, it has the option of bowing down into that hollowed out section rather than pushing up against the glass. And then of course it is 6mm or 1/4-inch borosilicate glass on top with covered in dirt and dust that needs to be cleaned. Now, to drive this heat bed at the time, we had invested in a UK company to custom build these for us. And let me see if I can show you those there. These are huge MOSFETs. They're actually originally designed for a solar power circuit. And you can tell by the size of those connectors, just referencing my pinky, for the size. These will take, I believe, like a 4-gauge wire on them. They are just massive. But so these are basically dual MOSFETs that'll handle about 40 amps on each side, which was overkill for the bed. But nobody was making anything large enough at the time. These priced out at being about $100, which came out way too ridiculous. So this might actually go away, and I might just replace it with 2 of these smaller 25 amp MOSFETs that are much smaller, use a lot less juice, and will be a lot easier. This particular guy requires, if you can see with the enclosure, its own fan. So, and it mounted externally to the printer. There was no real way to mount it on the printer because of the size, and it got really loud. So I'm hoping to do away with that. So a lot of the upgrades to the past the gMax 1.5 I've already started and done. As you can see, this is all done down here on the Z-axis. These little thingies here are something of my design. They just once you get your rod in there, they just pop in around it and prevent Z-wobble just a little bit. The hole in there is about probably 8 to 10 millimeters, and so there's a lot of play on that rod. And while you don't want to completely restrain it since it's not preloaded, it at least constrains the amount of bounce that it gets. The brackets were gMax design and slightly modded, but this is to allow, you'll see their newer printers have the stepper motor at the bottom. So let me pull that back. The newer printers gMax puts out has the stepper motor at the bottom down here going up, and they get rid of the linear rail. This is a mod put out by a gentleman named Kyle who used to work at gCreate, and I'm not sure if he's still there or not. But it was kind of an experimental mod that he'd put out, just the bracket portion here, that allowed you to keep your motor at the top with your original length rods and still be able to move to the new style gCreate X-axis, which puts the belt in front of it instead of on top of it. So what that allowed me to do, and if I can pull that over here to show you this side, so you can see the X-axis motor goes vertical this way, the pulley's inside of here, and the belt just travels across the front. So let's take a look at the cart here. Now this is something that I've been working on, and it's my own design. Let me see if I can get that to stay put. There. Might have to just kind of hold it. So this cart is something that's of my own design here. This is kind of my second revision. It's a cart plate that just rolls on the slot, but it's two pieces on the front that are attached by magnets, and then there are a couple of lock screws that allow you, two in the bottom there, and two at the top that allow you to tighten it down. So I've added the Titan extruder, and this is the, it's not yet released, but let me try to get that in picture better. This is the Pico hybrid hot end, and it is tiny. If I can slide the fan out of the way, it is tiny. Now this is the stock part cooler that ships with that to itself to keep it tiny. And I know Dustin Chapman has been experimenting with that, and that may need to get reworked, but we're going to try it as is for now. So we'll see where that goes. Let's see. So I guess let me pull this back. So the things that I need to finish on here. See, any questions for you guys watching in the chat there? I know this is seems to be more of a rambling than anything, but honestly, this was also meant just as a way for me to document what changes and upgrades I'm doing to myself, because I can actually go back and play this video later and listen to my own notes. But if anybody has questions, no questions yet, do I? Okay. Yeah, if anybody has questions. So the things that need to be done, I have the pulley for this. I just need to get the right size bolt to attach the pulley for this side. And then, of course, mount the pulley. And that will finish the X-axis. The Z-axis is done. And that will be the completion of the structural stuff. I guess note to self is I may need to eventually design some sort of an alternate part cooling fan if I find the little tiny blower that Pico B3 Innovations B3i, if I find that to be inadequate as Dustin has, I may need to design something else for part cooling. But for now, we'll run with that, simply because it's really small and light. The height of this pairing of the Pico on the original Titan like this is actually shorter and lighter than the Titan Aero. And of course, the Titan Aero doesn't include any kind of a part cooling fan, so that's with the part cooling fan, it's lighter. So that's all that's left on the structural. Finish this bracket and get the belts on there. The Y-axis is not changing at this time. It's already evolved and it's changed. I do need to tighten that belt down there since it's been sitting under tension so long, and probably need to put some grease in the fittings on there. Looking at wiring here, let me see if I can rotate this. so I can get you guys a better shot. Maybe. Is that going to work? All right. Let me try to pull up this bundle so I can show you guys here. So originally I had a dual extruder on here, dual E3Ds. So what I had done was I came out with a wiring arrangement where I had used two appropriately sized gauge wires for the heaters in the two E3D hot ends. Then I used Cat5 for everything else. The red, the blue, if you can see those here, the red and the blue and the green actually correlate. If you were to look in Fusion 360 or most CAD softwares, the red, the green, and the blue correlate to the motion and the end stops for. Let me go back over to the other camera. See if that's good enough. Yeah. So the blue, for example, or I'm sorry, the green would have been your y-axis, the red would have been your x, and your blue here would have been your z, which correlates to the color coding. Yep, XYZ coloring. Exactly, do. And then for the hot end, I had used gray, black, and white for the dual hot ends and the dual steppers that were up there. I'm on the fence about pulling out the Cat5 cabling, and I'm still on the fence. The boards are loose simply because I've been working on it, but you can see I've used these little boards which I can wire right into that look like that. If that shows you. It gives me my 8 connectors there, and then it gives me 8 wires out. And I can stick those right on top of the stepper. I'm probably going to build a little enclosure rather than just using hot glue to put those on. It's easy connection, Duo, or Dragon Monk, I'm sorry. The one thing about Cat5 is I'm trained, how do I say this? I'm trained to use appropriate wire and wire gauge, and I know what I'm getting into when I wire something up. I've seen too many people in the RepRap community that are using Cat5 or Cat6 incorrectly. It's a 24 gauge cable typically inside of a pre-made, and it is stranded typically inside of a pre-made. And I say typically because there's exceptions to the rule, but if you're making your own cables, and buying it in bulk, chances are you're getting solid core cable, which breaks very easy, cannot handle being bent, and it's not made for this application. Additionally, the connectors in an RJ45 are not meant for high current connections. They're meant for very low voltage. Granted, they'll carry PoE, which will go up to 48 volts, but it's still very low current in that scenario. And don't use it for flex. Yeah, I can safely, how do I say this? I can confidently and safely use Cat5 on my own machines because I know the limitations and I know the safety that needs to go into place with those. But because I'm showing these printers on YouTube, I am cautious of using it in future designs because I don't want people that don't have that experience thinking, oh, I've got a Cat5 cable on the shelf, let me pull it out and power up my hot end from it. Because that's when things go, houses burn down, and that's when people say, yep, well, I saw Chris do it, and his house didn't burn down, so I thought it was okay. So I'm really, really leery about it because of that. So I don't know. Stranded Cat5 is fine for carrying the 4 conductors for an EMA 17. It is fine for carrying low voltage and for thermistors or for end stops, or even for a BL Touch. It is not okay for carrying voltage for your hot end or for your heat bed. So I'm undecided, but that is something I definitely need to work out and decide what I'm going to do as far as wiring. It was originally meant, the biggest reason I did it originally was because I was experimenting with different control boards, and I'd actually used a Tupperware box that I'd mounted my control board into, which is in the house buried right now and I can't get it out. But if I had a board, I basically made up a couple of different boxes so I could go back and forth between a ramps and a rumba simply by unplugging the Cat 5s, unplugging these 2 connectors for the hot end, swapping out the box and plugging it all back in. And when we were doing a lot of testing, that worked really good for me because I could have one board loaded with stable firmware, and I could have one board loaded with stable firmware, and then I could also have another box that I could plug it in just very easily if I wanted to experiment with newer versions of Marlin or Repeater or other things. Biggie Man Mike, no, never split between pairs and high. And that's part of the exact same thing that I'm talking about. I've seen houses burn down because people have tried to run RS-45 carrying 24 volts over Cat 5 where they're putting it on the pairs. All it takes is one of those 2 wires in that pair to break, and now you're back down to a single conductor with an intermittent wire that could be creating a spark, and you've just created a fire. So I would not recommend that to anybody to do that safely. You might be able to get away with it, but again, by the book, by the safety, doubling up your pairs is not necessarily, it's not the safest thing to do. If one can't carry the load, then it shouldn't be used. But anyway, I think that's about it. So I need to finish this X-axis, and I need to rewire everything or figure out what I'm going to wire. I guess I also need to decide what control board I want to use. I've got several options. I have a full-size Cohesion Remix, which runs Smoothie. I've got a couple of S-bases floating around, and I've got a rearm. All 3 of those options run Smoothie, which I'm not huge on the firmware. And then I have a rumba board which came off of here, which would support everything that we're doing with it, and that would run Marlin. So I'm kind of torn. Part of me wants to go, even though I don't like Smoothie, part of me wants to go with like the S-base or one of the other Smoothie boards or the rearm, just so that when Marlin 2.0 comes out and starts getting stable, I can flash that in there and start experimenting that without having to rewire everything. The other part of me just wants to get it back up and running stable, and so I'm kind of torn. Don't know what to do. But anyway, let's turn this guy back around. And hear me grunt again. So one thing I never did care for about the gMax platform that you can see here is when the bed is all the way forward, it's protruding about that far. When it's all the way back, it's protruding about that far. So you can't put this up against your wall. You've got to have at least almost a foot more with the heat bed on there, but about a foot behind you, between your table and where the wall's at, or run it sideways, I guess, and you know, turn it this way and have it run left to right, but then you still need that. Yeah, I've got the option of the 32-bit board. I mean, I have the 3 flavors that I can use: the Cohesion 3D, the MKS S-Base, or the rearm, which uses a ramps on, or turns ramps into a smoothie. Or I've got the 8-bit Rumba board that I could put on it. Or I guess I could probably dig out you know, a ramps if I really wanted to go backwards that far. Plenty of options in the connection. I mean, I could actually put a ramps FD on here if I really wanted to start a fire. But so I think I'm going to reach out to Scott and find out how far along the Marlin 2.0 is for the S-Base and the rearm, and I think that's going to drive my decision on that. Scott, aka Thinky Head, over the main developer over at Marlin Firmware. So, and let me show you some other toys while we have this out here. These came in the mail. I haven't decided where I'm going to use these yet, but this box came in the mail from a company called Triangle Labs. As far as I know, you can buy them through AliExpress out of China, and as far as I know, that's the only place that you can get them. And they hit me up. They knew I did a lot of rework on printers and asked if I wanted to try some of their stuff, and so they sent me some stuff here. So let me show you. Some of this will definitely go in here. I just haven't figured out exactly how I want to do it yet. So these guys, survey says, there we go. These guys are the 4-diode version. Hey Calvin, how are you? You missed everything. These are the 4-diode version of the TL smoothers. And Curtis is here. They sent me 6 of these boards, which means I can cover 6 steppers. And so there's 6 of those in here. There are 2 of these really neat kits here. These are out of filament detectors. And I'll throw some links. I didn't get a chance to do it before the stream, but if anybody's interested in any of these, I'll throw links down in the description if you want to check them out. These are, well, in fact, here, trianglelab.org. Here we go. These are out of filament detectors. So filament will run through them, and it's basically a switch. The neat thing about these, though, is that there's 2 connectors so that they can be daisy chained. So if you're using a dual or a quad extruder, you can stack 4 of them up, and if any of the 4 go out, they just take up a single input on your board to trigger. They include a short piece of PTFE, and yeah, Miggy Mike, they do make a lot of copies. One of the things that I had asked them for to go with what's in this envelope right here, this is a Y splitter that they sent me. A lot of their stuff is copies. They make the E3D copies, but I believe their E3D copies actually are made to spec. Big air quotes on that one, meaning that it's not a PTFE tube running all the way through, but I believe they make 2 different versions. This is their Y splitter doohickey that they sent. What they didn't send me with this that I'd asked for was their Titan. They make a copy or a clone of the E3D Titan, which, like you, I've heard it's decent. I've heard people say, worst case, you buy a replacement gear for it. And it works. But so I'd hope they would send me the Titans to go with that, because then I could just feed a Titan straight into this and move this off of here. The last thing, though, that they did send was this kit here. I'm trying to think how to show this. So these are a collection of piezo sensors, and they sent different sizes because there's different ways to use it. But in general, a piezo sensor basically detects motion or movement. So the way this would most likely work, and what it's intended for, this is an open source project too, that you could theoretically you could say that they cloned it, but it's hard to say that they cloned it when it's an open source project. So it's it's hard to where to put that. It's so the way this thing works is it's a piezo sensor, and I actually have to figure out how it goes together. Your typical E3D is going to have a groove mount like that at the top. This is going to sit at the top of your groove mount like that, and this is going to somehow go over it, so your filament will feed through it. Again, I have to figure out which pieces go where to do it. So pretend that's your extruder coming down. When it taps the bed, it basically creates a sound which is picked up by the piezo. And it allows you to do auto leveling just by tapping, like that. So you do the tap, it picks up the vibration or the motion through the extruder up to it. And I've heard different things. Okay, so you have the Delta version. So yeah, they do. They still, because it's open source, they're providing the pieces, but they're saying here's the parts, but we don't know how to use it. Or at least that's the way I'm understanding it. They're saying here's the parts, but go back to the open source community, and they'll show you how to use it because they're the ones who designed it. So, and again, I'm on the fence about that, because you can see here they're giving you a bunch of parts. There's 5 or 6 different piezos with or without holes. There's a board. It's all the components. Oh, you mean the commercial side for the original, not the open source side. That's interesting. I didn't know that one. But I'm personally on the fence about their version of it, because it is an open source project. They're not selling it to you as an assembled product. They're just selling you a bunch of parts so that you can build it yourself. So it's no different than me printing it out or going to Radio Shack to get the pieces, except for Radio Shack's closed down. They're just packaging it into a bundle for you. But anyway, that is the stuff from Triangle Labs. The Y splitter was going to go on here. Oh, does it? I haven't looked at that yet, Mike. I will have to check that out. That's kind of funny. Yeah, I'm really personally on the fence. I mean, it's an open design, and again, they're not selling it as an assembled product. They're selling a bag of parts. So it's kind of hard to argue with them selling you a bag of parts. That's just me. I guess the only part that is kind of proprietary, to throw the air quotes back in, is the little circuit board that reads it. Well, Calvin, the software legwork is completely different, because that's off in the firmware side. But yeah, I don't know. I need to dig into that and look and see what they're doing before I say anything else. I don't know enough about what Triangle Labs is, how they're pushing it, and what the original people are doing. Said personally, ethically, if they're just selling a bag of parts, then it's just a bag of parts. Yeah, exactly. Software side is just configuring Marlin. It's no different than a BL Touch or any other sensor like I have here. Right. But anyway, so back to Ozzy here. Anyone have any questions on what is going to become of him or where he's going? Oh, you know what? I didn't show you two more things on here that were things that we did. Let me see if I can turn this back around again without throwing out my back. This does weigh about 50 pounds. It's heavy. So I'll show you two things. One thing that I designed that for the early gMaxes was this tensioner to replace the stock gMax bracket. And it's just a bolt that goes through and slides the pulley back and forth. So those are actually out there on GitHub if anybody ever has a gMax and ever wants to add one of these. The files for that are on GitHub. The other part to show you is this heat bed. Let me clip those wire ties off of there so I can show you how that works. So, since I'm going to have to redo all this anyway. So the way this was designed, this heat bed when we had it designed, was we built it so that there's a tab out the back, like so. There's solder pads on here if you wanted to solder to it. What we did is we had it drilled and we used brass bolts and we used lugs. So this actually comes off the back. This way you can crimp your wires onto it, and it's pretty easy to do it. Your thermistor wires just come out, underneath wherever you place those, but those are for your inner and outer zones. And then we designed this bracket. The camera's not showing that, is it? There we go. So the tab just sticks out like this. We designed it so that there's a hole here, and basically we have a studded terminal going through so that you can just crimp your wire down like so, put the ring over it, and tighten it down. And then we designed this bracket. If you can see it, there's a slot on either side. So this just slides up right over that. There's two holes here that you can zip tie it. When you do that, it puts a little bit of a preload to keep that on there. The board itself acts to hold it there. Yeah, it's Calvin. It's close to 60 amps total between the two zones, if I remember correctly. I was actually driving this off two separate power supplies. One of the power supplies purely for the bed, and one for the one of them purely for the bed, and one of them for the rest of the printer. 12 volts. The folks that we had designed the bed for us told us that on this type of trace, never done eggs, it's too messy. I did do pancakes on it. I didn't want the mess with the egg yolks, but I did do pancakes on it just to prove it could be done. And it would also boil a cup of water. So yeah, it's 12 volts. It's about 720 watts. It takes a lot of juice. Again, you don't have to run both. Well, Calvin, you didn't see this then. I think you missed out on that. Those are the MOSFETs that turn it on and off. But it's a big heat bed. I mean, it's overkill, but it gets hot quick. Um, you know, the whole bed would get up to about 100 degrees Celsius in about 5 minutes. Yeah, it is a monster FET. Again, it's designed for solar. It was the original application for that. I'm not sure why you would be scared. There's cork. Cork is fireproof, basically. Cork is the best and most perfect insulation you can get out of nature. It doesn't burn. It actually resists heat. I can touch the bottom of this and there's no heat. Yeah, this is a 400 millimeter, 407, 408, something like that. 16.5-inch square bed, dual zone that gets that hot that fast. I've ran it pretty darn hot too. Well, cork will burn, but it takes blue flame to get it to burn. I mean, it takes a lot of heat. It takes a lot. If a lot of houses in Europe are actually insulated. Right, exactly. Exactly. So let me switch back up there. I'll grab my camera or my coffee. And we'll slide the boom back out of the way. So anyway, that's where Ozzy's headed. Hopefully sometime this decade I'll get him back up and running. So. Yeah, it is. My first experience seeing cork try to burn was back when I was about 10 years old, and watching my mother try to take a cork, a wine stopper, basically. She was dressing me up as a bum or a hobo back then, with the the red bandana over my shoulder tied on a string and the whole 9 yards for Halloween. And my mother, taken a wine cork, tried to burn one of the ends just to make the soot on it, the scorching on it, so she could rub it on my cheeks to make it look like I'd been in the dirt and stuff. And she sat there for about probably 20 or 30 minutes holding it up to the stove and the fire trying to get it to burn, and she never could get it to burn. Then all because I refused to let her put makeup on me. Thanks, Mike. I don't know. Any questions on Ozzy? I had contemplated getting some longer extrusion and rails and possibly increasing the Z height, but I really don't see any reason to. I've never printed anything that big, on it. I know they make the gMax XT, but it's not 30/30. It's actually 1.5-inch heavy-duty 80/20. So it's approximately 30 by 30, but it's all imperial sized. It's hefty. Yeah, I believe they are, on the newer versions of the gMax, I believe they are starting to convert everything finally over to fully metric. At least hopefully that's the case. So, there used to be under bed lights too in the bottom of these rails down here. I did have lights on it at one point, so the whole thing glowed from underneath. The build volume, it's hard to say because nothing is exactly to size at this point. Roughly in inches, 16 inches by 16 inches by about 12 inches tall. A laser and do some large-scale engraving. I'm going to do the safe answer and say no, not at this time. Although I do have a violet laser that GearBest had sent me that I haven't done anything with. And because this is a modular tool plate here, that this can be removed easy, if I come up with an easy wiring scheme that would support both the laser and this, there's nothing saying I can't build a tool plate for it. NeoPixels are great. Yeah, NeoPixels are excellent. I don't know what lighting is going to go back on this when I get it done. I'm kind of want to keep it utilitarian. Yeah, 4x4x3. It's pretty close to that. I did have the RC connectors, Calvin, originally, the XT20s, and then I migrated to these guys, which I don't remember. Oh, you can't see those. Well, these red and black things that are heavy-duty automotive battery-size connectors that can take the arcs. But I was using XT20 RC connectors, and most of my low-voltage connectors are JST-style RC car connectors. Like those ones. Anderson plugs, thank you. There we go. Yeah, they work great. They're easy to go. They lock together, or they can unlock by pulling this little pin out. So if you need to separate them, they're lock before make, which means that you minimize your arcing on them. So you can get them all the way pushed into where they're at the locking point, and then that last point is where they, yeah, and you can rotate them to key them as well. So they work really well. These aren't the rotating kind. These are just the standard. Oh, I guess you could rotate it. I see what you mean. 180, not left and right, because they have the 90-degree rotation ones too, on the larger ones. But yep. They slide together and they don't make contact until you have them slid all the way in so that you're not arcing the entire time you're pushing in. Right. All right, well, does anyone have any other questions, or should we wrap things up? I just kind of wanted to show where this was going and collect my thoughts on it and let you guys see where it was going. Been putting off working on this guy way too long, and it's time to get him out and get him back together. And going once, going twice. Yeah, Randy, I'll talk to you on firmware after I talk to Scott. End stops. The end stop designs are all of my own. Unfortunately, I lost all of the files for the end stop holders that I'm using, but they're nothing special. End stop here in the front that triggers off the bottom of the bed. There's the X end stop that triggers off the side here, and the BL Touch acts as the Z end stop. I don't have a physical end stop for the Z other than the BL Touch. But I think those are pretty much it. I may add wiring to add gMax end stops if I plan on, or if I look at adding a laser or something on it. That would allow us to get exact positioning. Yeah, so nothing interesting. I'm open to ideas if anybody has anything they want to DM me. Thanks, Joe. I reported as well. I'm open to ideas, Mike, if you have anything interesting for end stops that you think I should be looking at. But other than that, an end stop's an end stop, as long as it makes it stop where it needs to get to. Don't really plan on doing optical or anything like that. No. All right, well, let's wrap it up there before we get any optical end stops with printed adjustable flags. Maybe I'll back burner that idea. I sometimes like just good old-fashioned mechanical. Yeah, opticals work great as filament runout sensors as well. I prefer those as long as you can get yourself something dark to put them into, and non-reflective for filament runout. But we'll see what these little Triangle Labs ones, how they do. And the Hall effect ones, the inductive sensors, they could be interesting as well. I always get leery about proximity sensing of any kind, though, where magnetics are involved, because there's so many things that can impact that. I mean, when we're dealing with where there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 steppers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steppers on here that are all creating inductive electrical noise, so EMF. That always scares me with Hall effect sensors. And no black ABS. This is all done in Russell Blue PETG. The last of it, except for these 2 pieces here and here. Well, on both sides, but the upper and the lower piece, just because I didn't want to completely disassemble it to replace those. But all the others are in my Russell Blue PETG. And all the rest of the pieces will be for it, but I've got 4 rolls set aside just for repairing this printer. Yeah, we do. The PC Plus will be awesome. I cannot wait to play with that. But all right, well, we're coming up on an hour here. I will let you guys get back to your day. Thanks, everyone, for dropping in. Thanks for the questions. If you think of anything else after the stream, just DM me, or you guys know how to get a hold of me. DM me, leave me a comment, throw the string and coconut over the fence, whatever works. But Petty Blue, thanks, Mike. I actually have the RGB colors of this too before the company went out of business. Thank you, Calvin. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, other Mike. And Curtis, if you're still around, and anybody else watching. See y'all later. Aloha.